Good day, everyone, especially to the distinguished members of the panel of evaluators, Dr. Guillermo Bernabe, Dr. Remedio Sado, and Dr. Lincoln Bautista. I'm Vincent Cotoron, and more or less than an hour, I am going to present to you the output of my research work titled Supply Chain Management Practices on Life Cycle Cost of Marine Equipment in Offshore Vessels, a Life Cycle Management Approach. For today's presentation, I would like to discuss the salient points of my thesis, which covers the following. And in Chapter 1, the problem and its setting are in introduction, conceptual framework, statement of the problem, and hypothesis. In Chapter 2, review of related literatures and studies is only the synthesis of reviewed literatures and studies. In Chapter 3, which is the methodology, I will give a brief review on the statistical treatment of data. In Chapter 4, results and discussion, which is obviously the main output of this research, I will present the answer to all stated problems. And in Chapter 5, I will end my discussion on summary of findings, conclusions, and recommendations offered in this research. In Chapter 1, to give you a brief background of this study, please allow me to start my discussion by letting us all think of a ship. Yes, a ship. It's either a new building project or it could be on its operational life cycle. Ships are a vital element in modern world economy, contributing to continuous flow of goods and as means of transport for people. The Secretary General of International Maritime Organization in 2004 to 2011, Euthymios Mitropoulos, believed that without the shipping industry, half of the world would freeze and the other half would starve. According to Tupper in 2004, ships still carry the 95% of global trade. Ships, their equipment, and their functions are subject to constant evolution driven by changing patterns of world trade, by social pressures, by technological improvements in materials, construction techniques and control systems, and by pressure of economics. Offshore vessels are also constrained to these inevitable changes. As reported by Kimmons et al. In 2011, in the current operating context, the changes in the shipping industry have been driven by a mixture of legislation, mainly through the IMO, and action by industry leaders. The industry has responded to global concern over safety, oil spills, ballast water, anti-fouling systems, and air pollution, creating new emission control areas and achieving a reduction in oil pollution incidents. There is now a raft of regulation in place, and this is mirrored by industry initiatives. While regulation emanating from the IMO is largely environmental in nature, there is often mutual benefit between safety and environmental protection. Marine equipment manufacturers also adjusted to these demands of the existing rules and regulations and initiatives driven by industry leaders. Corbett and Winnebrake in 2008 recognized that this as maritime transformations in response to globalization as motivated by a desire to reduce costs, environmental protection, safety at sea, and improve vessel performance. With these current initiatives of more efficient equipment to be in place on board, although beneficial in its operations, ship owners are eyeing some roadblocks in acquisition of the equipment, which may add more life cycle costs. From a life cycle management perspective, the supply chain management practices, or ACM practices, are inexplicit and have lesser focus in the downstream and contributing to these constraints. While in upstream supply chains in the manufacturing industry, results in the study conducted by Lee, Raghunathan, and Rao in 2004 indicates that higher levels of supply chain management practices can lead to enhanced competitive advantage and improved organizational performance. Same is true to the performance of both the automotive and aerospace industries, which according to Fleischer, Kohler, Lamb, and Bignoni in 1999, it has improved significantly through improved management of supply chains. However, in the downstream supply chains, especially in the marine and shipping industry, marine equipment end users such as ship owners are struggling as most shipbuilding contracts are giving major control in the procurement of marine equipment to the shipbuilder. The current practice of procurement gives the shipbuilder and the equipment supplier a more relaxed liability in terms of life cycle cost of the equipment in the supply chain, while the manufacturing, automotive, and aerospace industry are substantially different from marine and shipbuilding industry. The ship owners, shipbuilders, and suppliers can learn supply chain best practices and improve important lessons that can be adopted to manage the cost of marine equipment. Mr. David V. Marin, the technical director of Swire Pacific Offshore, in one of our personal communication on May 8, 2017, he says, once the ship is delivered and on its service life, which is typically 25 years, during maintenance and repair period or during necessary replacement of the equipment, ship owners has no bargaining power with the supplier of the equipment, and as a result of this, marine business costs are in general very high compared to industrial applications, as basically the vendor can hold the ship owner to ransom as they are not likely to change the product due to cost or poor service. Without so much choice, throughout the lifetime of this vessel, in the procurement of marine equipment, its supply chain significant costs are to be borne by ship owners such as the Swire Pacific Offshore. Swire Pacific Offshore is a trusted name in the offshore marine industry. SPO is a leading service provider of the offshore oil and gas industry with a global presence. SPO owns and operates over 75 offshore support vessels. In a merchant vessel category, offshore vessels are regarded as specially designed ships for transporting of goods and personnel to offshore oil platforms that operate in deep oceans. With specialized missions, offshore vessels and end users, such as charterers, have also specific efficiency requirements to each offshore vessels dictated from their needs on its offshore operations, especially on the equipment efficiency in terms of technological advancement and fuel efficiency. That is why it is vital that ship owners are perceptive to meet the diverse needs of its client by keeping the marine equipment placed on board with high efficiency and reliability. Relevant to the constant evolution of ships, their equipment, and their function, these changes are inevitable from time to time to accommodate international rules and regulations. An example is the European Union Maritime Equipment Directive of 2014, which covers all types of marine equipment that fall under the following international conventions developed by International Maritime Organization: the Safety of Life at Sea or SOLAS in 1974, Marine Pollution or MARPOL in 1973, and International Regulations for Preventing Collisions at Sea or COLREGS in 1972. The changes may be also necessary to cater ship owner or end users' needs and requirements. At some point, marine equipment installed on board is not always a practical solution to the conventional task relatively unique to the vessel's purpose and mission. Equipment may also require replacement due to damage and modernization for better technology. Challenges may arise during a preventive maintenance, repair, rebuild, and replacement cycle of onboard equipment, such as equipment is to be procured from vendors which had been in legal binding contract with the shipbuilder during the vessel's construction. In some building contracts, procurement of marine equipment is to be performed by the shipbuilder and they buy what is favorable for them. Ship owners have no direct involvement in the procurement of marine equipment necessary to be installed. Hence, ship owner have no bargaining power once the vessel is delivered. After the vessel's delivery, the procurement of marine equipment necessary during replacement or repair are to be undertaken by ship owner's procurement team. But the process is even more challenging as downstream supply chain activities can add more cost in the acquisition of the equipment. Ship owners such as Swire Pacific Offshore are continually looking for strategic solutions to address this problem. But there is no generally accepted practice and agreement between vendors and ship owners yet being followed. Hence, individual ship owners are making backdoor negotiations during project initiation stage with vendors prior to deciding which shipyard can work with a predetermined arrangement between the ship owners and vendors. The downstream supply chain management practices are isolated within the organization's process in the procurement of marine equipment, whatever suits them, such as what the shipyards are currently practicing. This study recognizes that equipment life can be defined in three different ways: physical life, profit life, and the economic life as described by Mitchell in 1998, which will be discussed in more detail in Chapter 2. However, this study gives a detailed emphasis in the economic life of marine equipment, by which Grantsberg and O'Connor in 2015 used this as a tool to determine the replacement time period. Hence, this study attempted to assess the importance, implementation, and impact of downstream supply chain management practices and life cycle costs of marine equipment in offshore vessels of Swire Pacific Offshore in life cycle management approach. The main concept in this study will focus on the importance, implementation, and impact of downstream supply chain management practices on life cycle costs of marine equipment in offshore vessels of Swire Pacific Offshore in a life cycle management approach. This study proposes the set of activities undertaken for coordinating the flow of information and delivery of marine equipment from manufacturer's point of origin down to wholesalers, retailers, and customers or end users, which the researcher specifically identified these activities as the downstream supply chain management practices applicable to the shipbuilding and shipping industry. The downstream supply chain management practices to be utilized in this study are based on the multi-dimensional concepts, which are reviewed and consolidated from available literature and which the researcher further believed to be more applicable practices in the procurement of marine equipment. The framework of this study uses the concept of the five categorical process, outlining the downstream supply chain management practices on life cycle costs of marine equipment. These five categories are supplier, customer partnerships and leaderships, the strategic planning and design process, cost reduction mechanisms, supply chain system integration, and measurement and continuous improvement. Figure 1 shows the relationship of input variables which contain the profile of company respondents, the level of importance, extent of implementation, and assessment on the impact of downstream supply chain management practices on the life cycle costs of marine equipment. On the other hand, the process involves the gathering of data through the use of survey questionnaire, the data presentation, analysis, and data interpretation, and test of hypothesis. The framework emphasizes the output, which is to give recommendations on improved downstream supply chain management practices, tools, processes, and models for strategic supply chain cost management. This study attempted to assess the importance, implementation, and impact of downstream supply chain management practices on life cycle costs of marine equipment in offshore vessels of Swire Pacific Offshore in life cycle management approach. Specifically, this study sought to answer the following questions. First problem is what is the profile of company respondents in terms of type of business entity, group of marine equipment key player, and number of years of operation. The second problem is, how do the respondents assess the level of importance of downstream supply chain management practices on life cycle costs of marine equipment in offshore vessels in terms of supplier-customer partnership and leadership, strategic planning and design process, cost reduction mechanisms, supply chain systems integration, and measurement and continuous improvement? The third problem is, what is the extent of implementation of downstream supply chain management practices on life cycle costs of marine equipment in offshore vessels in terms of supplier-customer partnership and leadership, strategic planning and design process, cost reduction mechanisms, supply chain systems integration, and measurement and continuous improvement? The fourth problem is there a significant differences in the assessment of respondents on the extent of implementation of downstream supply chain management practices on the life cycle cost of marine equipment when grouped according to profile? And the fifth problem is, what proposed improvement of downstream supply chain management practices and life cycle cost of marine equipment can be employed based on the data gathered? The null hypothesis of this study is, there is no significant difference on the assessment of the respondents on the extent of implementation of supply chain management practices when grouped according to profile. So that ends our chapter 1. So let me proceed with a review of related literature and studies. At this point, I will only give an emphasis on the synthesis of related literature and studies. Optimizing vessel performance has always been a priority of ship owners and operators. The higher focus on the way vessels operate is dictated by increasing regulations and a growing concern for the global environmental impact of shipping. This increased pressure forces shipping companies to improve vessel technical and operational efficiency even further. In the operational life cycle of the vessel and its equipment, activities such as preventive maintenance, repair, rebuild, and replacement are also inevitable, and this always come with costs, which are associated in both the cost to maintain the economic life of equipment and its cost during the acquisition through the supply chain. Supply chain practices may be viewed as a variety of different perspectives, but its effective implementation will always direct to the same goal, which is to get a product and service to the right place and at the right time at the lowest cost. The end-to-end view of product cost to be reflected in the marketplace is vital to attain sustainability through transparent and ethical supply chain. Deep-rooted as organizations' survival instinct, managing the cost in the supply chain is a strategic solution in the procurement of marine equipment by employing a well-thought-out, understandable, and implementable strategy to reduce costs. However, supply chain cost management requires major sacrifices and compromises, shifts in paradigms, changes in policies, and a leadership that drives to resilience in global race. During the operating life cycle of the ship, a strategic alignment of marine equipment procurement to comprehensive life cycle cost management is pivotal to a new paradigm that can lead to reduction of supply chain costs and increases equipment reliability and vessel readiness. Well, in the part of methodology, I'm going to give a quick review on the statistical treatment of data. Percentage distribution was used to analyze the profile of the company respondents in terms of type of business entity, group of marine equipment key player, and number of years of operation. Weighted mean and average weighted mean were used in the analysis of the assessment of the respondents on the level of importance of downstream supply chain management practices on life cycle costs of marine equipment in offshore vessels in terms of supplier customer partnership and leadership, the strategic planning and design process, cost reduction mechanisms, supply chain system integration, and measurement and continuous improvement. Weighted mean and average weighted mean were also used in the analysis of the assessment of the respondents on the extent of implementation of downstream supply chain management practices on life cycle costs of marine equipment in offshore vessels in terms of supplier customer partnership and leadership, strategic planning and design process, cost reduction mechanisms, supply chain systems integration, and measurement and continuous improvement. Kruskal-Wallis H test using SPSS statistics was conducted to determine if there is a significant difference on the assessment of respondents on the extent of implementation of downstream supply chain management practices on life cycle costs of marine equipment when grouped according to profile. Since Kruskal-Wallis H-test is an omnibus test in statistics and cannot tell which specific groups of independent variables are statistically significantly different from each other, as it only tells that at least two groups were different, a post hoc tests were also conducted as a follow-up to confirm where the differences occurred between groups. Specifically, the pairwise comparisons were performed using Dunn's procedure with a Benferroni correction for a multiple comparisons to statistically confirm where the differences occurred between groups. Now, the main output of this research. The results and discussion will answer all the stated problems of this study based on the data gathered in administering a survey questionnaire to the respondents from Swar Pacific Offshore, Japan Marine United Corporation, Yanmar, Wärtsilä, MTU, Bergen Marine, GE Power, Caterpillar, and MAN Diesel and Turbo. The problem number 1, what is the profile of company respondents according to the type of business entity, group of marine equipment, key player, and number of years of operation? On the next slides are the tables showing the profile of company respondents according to type of business entity, group of marine equipment, key player, and number of years of operation. Table 2 shows the profile of company respondents according to type of business entity. It can be observed that public corporations or companies have the highest percentage distribution with 25 respondents or 39.70% that were coming from 3 company respondents. Private limited company was represented by 13 respondents or 20.60% that was coming from 1 company respondent, while both public limited company and privately held company with 2 company respondents each were represented with 15.90% or 10 respondents from each type. On the other hand, 1 company respondents categorized as limited liability company was represented by 5 respondents or 7.94%. All respondents, the 63 coming from all 9 company respondents, belong to a corporation, a form of business organization established by a company or a group of people authorized by law to act as a single entity. This implies that these companies are established either as a parent company or as a wholly owned subsidiary or as a result of mergers and acquisitions. Table 3 reveals the distribution according to group of marine equipment key player. Based on the result, the suppliers dominate in the group which comprise of 35 or 55.56% of the respondents. On the other hand, shipbuilders group comes in second with 15 or 23.81% of the respondents, and not too far is the ship owner group with 13 respondents or 20.63%. As shown in Table 4, the profile of company respondents according to number of years of operation. It reveals that 66 or 0.67% or 6 out of 9 companies subjected in this study are operating more than 30 years already, which further reveals that 60% or 38 out of 63 respondents were coming from these companies. Although the other 3 companies share the equal percentage of 11.11%, the respondents from a company who operates in 16 to 20 years outnumbered from the rest with 15 or 24%. On the other hand, both companies who operate in 11 to 15 years and in 10 years and below have the same percentage of respondents with 8%. The result implies that majority of the company respondents as a key player are actively involved in the supply chain of marine equipment in more than 30 years already. Let's proceed to answer the problem number 2, which is how do the respondents assess the level of importance of downstream supply chain management practices on life cycle costs of marine equipment in offshore vessels in terms of supplier-customer partnership and leadership, strategic planning and design process, cost reduction mechanisms, supply chain systems integration, and measurement and continuous improvement. To answer this problem, next slides will present each table that shows the results of the respondents' assessment on the level of importance of downstream supply chain management practices on life cycle cost of marine equipment in offshore vessels of Swire Pacific Offshore with the computed weighted mean and average weighted mean in terms of supplier-customer partnership and leadership, strategic planning and design process, cost reduction mechanisms, supply chain systems integration and measurement and continuous improvement. The computed weighted mean of each item of supply chain management practices in terms of category are ranked and interpreted based on weighted mean range. As shown in Table 5, the level of importance of supply chain management practices in terms of supplier-customer partnership and leadership, it reveals that customer relationship such as complaints management and after-sales service is placed as first in the rank with highest weighted mean, which is 4.56 and interpreted as very important, and followed by item number 4, the agreed vision and goals for supply chain cost management with a weighted mean of 4.46 and also interpreted as very important. In rank 3 is supplier-customer partnership in supply chain cost management with a weighted mean of 4.38. Placed in the 4th rank is supplier relationship management as a strategy or culture of trust with a weighted mean of 4.26, also interpreted as very important. In rank 5 is top management involvement in supply chain cost management with a weighted mean of 4.22 and interpreted as very important. On the other hand, items 3 and 7 are placed in rank 6 and 7 with a weighted means of 4.19 and 3.88 respectively, which both are interpreted as important. The weighted mean or the weighted average mean on the level of importance of supply chain management practices in terms of supplier-customer partnership and leadership is 4.28 and interpreted as very important. This implies that all these practices are very important in managing supply chain on life cycle cost of marine equipment in offshore vessels of Swire Pacific Offshore. Table 6 shows the level of importance of supply chain management practices in terms of strategic planning and design process. The result reveals that supplier-customer long-term agreement to manage costs as first in the rank garnered the highest weighted mean, which is 4.10. In rank 2 is mutual planning and problem-solving efforts with a weighted mean of 3.89 and followed by mutual willingness to share responsibilities with a weighted mean of 3.9. In rank 4 is change adaptation and management with a weighted mean of 3.81 And lastly, in rank 5 is process benchmarking with a weighted mean of 3.75. The result shows that all practices tagged as part of the strategic planning and design process with an average weighted mean of 3.88 are indeed important in managing the supply chain and life cycle cost of marine equipment in offshore vessels of Swire Pacific offshore. As to the respondents' assessment on the level of importance of downstream supply chain management practices in terms of cost reduction mechanisms as shown in Table 7, it reveals that identifying critical costs in the supply chain rank 1 with a weighted mean of 4.43. In rank 2 is the well thought out request for quotation or RFQ responses with a weighted mean of 4.38. In the third rank is analyzing cost based on cost elements with a weighted mean of 4.37. Items number 5, organizing cost based on the cost elements, stays as rank 4 with a weighted mean of 4.29. Ranks 1, 2, 3, and 4 are interpreted as very important. On the other hand, item 7, target costing, is placed in the 5th rank with a weighted mean of 4.06 and interpreted as important, while items 8, 3, 1, and 2, which are also interpreted as important, are ranked in 6, 7, and 9 with a weighted means of 4.05, 3.96, 3.90, and 3.89 respectively. As observed, item 10, lowest total cost selection, is at the bottom rank with a weighted mean of 3.59 and also interpreted as important. The computed average weighted mean in the downstream supply chain management practices in terms of cost reduction mechanisms is 4.09. The result further shows that based on the computed average weighted mean, it strongly suggests that these practices are all important in the management of supply chain and life cycle costs of marine equipment in offshore vessels of Swire Pacific offshore. As mentioned by Fletcher et al. In 1999, cost reduction mechanisms are the core of supply chain management practices. These specific activities are used to work with members of the supply chain. These practices are vital to the purchasers, such as the shipyards and ship owners, to effectively implement the procurement plans they develop. Table 8 presents the level of importance of downstream supply chain management practices in terms of supply chain systems integration. The result reveals that rank 1 is just-in-time or lean capability, such as integration with planning and scheduling, with a weighted mean of 4.41 and interpreted as very important. In rank 2 is technology integration and design, which is e-commerce software, with a weighted mean of 4.1, and in rank 3 are level and quality of cost data information sharing transparency and logistics integration such as distribution channels, with a weighted means of 3.98. On the other hand, items 1 and 5 are placed in rank 4 and 5 with a weighted means of 3.97 and 3.95 respectively. Ranks 2, 3, 4, and 5 are all interpreted as important. The computed average weighted mean of downstream supply chain management practices in terms of supply chain systems integration is 4.07. This implies that these practices are indeed important to the management of supply chain and life cycle costs of marine equipment in offshore vessels of Swire Pacific offshore. As shown in Table 9, the level of importance in terms of measurement and continuous improvement, the result reveals that rank 1 is continuing professional development, such as education and training, having the highest weighted mean, which is 4.54 and interpreted as very important. While in Items 4, 5, and 3 with the weighted means of 4.49, 4.46, and 4.38 are ranked second, third, and fourth respectively, which are also interpreted as very important. On the other hand, items 2, which has the weighted mean of 4.13, is ranked 5, while item 1 with a weighted mean of 4.13 is in the bottom rank. The computed average weighted mean is 4.36, which is interpreted as very important. This implies that practices labeled as part of companies' measurement and continuous improvement initiatives are all imperative and in managing the supply chain of life cycle costs of marine equipment in offshore vessels of Swire Pacific offshore. Let's proceed to answer the problem number 3, which is what is the extent of implementation of downstream supply chain management practices on life cycle costs of marine equipment of offshore vessels in terms of supplier-customer partnership and leadership, strategic planning and design process, cost reduction mechanisms, supply chain system integration, and measurement and continuous improvement. To answer this problem, next slides will present each table that shows the result of respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of downstream supply chain management practices on life cycle cost of marine equipment in offshore vessels of Swire Pacific offshore with the computed weighted mean and average weighted mean in terms of supplier-customer partnership and leadership, strategic planning and design process, cost reduction mechanisms, supply chain systems integration, and measurement and continuous improvement. The computed weighted mean of each item of supply chain management practices in each category are ranked and interpreted based on the weighted mean range. Table 10 presents the extent of implementation of downstream supply chain management practices in terms of supplier-customer partnership and leadership. The result reveals that customer relationship, such as complaints management and after-sales service, is in rank 1 with the highest weighted mean of 3.66 and interpreted as implemented. There are two practices being implemented that are both placed in rank 2. These practices are supplier-customer partnership and supply chain cost management and agreed vision and goals for supply chain cost management, with a weighted mean of 3.60. Another practice being implemented, which is in rank 3, is intra-company supply chain cost management teams with a weighted mean of 3.59. As observed, the result further shows that there are three practices that are interpreted as somewhat implemented, and it starts in rank 4, which is supplier relationship management as a strategy, culture of trust, with a weighted mean of 3.37. This is followed by the customer and supplier geographical proximity with a weighted mean of 3.19. And at the bottom rank is top management involvement in supply chain cost management with a lowest weighted mean of 3.14. The computed average weighted mean in this category is 3.45 and interpreted as implemented. This implies that downstream supply chain management practices in terms of supplier-customer partnership and leadership are being practiced but not fully implemented. As shown in Table 11, the extent of implementation of supply chain management practices in terms of the strategic planning and design process, it shows that all practices are interpreted as somewhat implemented. Rank 1 is process benchmarking with a weighted mean of 3.02. It is followed by items 4, 1, and 3 with a weighted means of 2.98, 2.89, and 2.67 respectively, while item 5 change adaptation and management is at the bottom rank with the lowest weighted mean of 2.63. The result further shows based on the computed average weighted mean, which is 2.84 and is interpreted as somewhat implemented, that all supply chain management practices in terms of strategic, planning, and design process are only implemented in some degree. This implies that in the procurement process of marine equipment, supply chain management practices were more or less implemented that may directly or indirectly contributes to additional costs in the supply chain. Table 12 shows the result and the extent of implementation of supply chain management practices in terms of cost reduction mechanisms. Categorically, there are 5 practices interpreted as implemented. It shows that item 4, well thought out request for quotation and RFQ responses rank 1 with a weighted mean of 3.59. Second in the rank is item 6, analyzing cost and modeling, with a weighted mean of 3.59, while items 5, 9, and 7 with a weighted means of 3.50, 3.46, and 3.40 are in rank 3, 4, and 5 respectively. On the other hand, the other 5 practices are interpreted as somewhat implemented. As the result shows, items 8, 2, and 1 with a weighted means of 3.21, 3.10, and 3.08 are ranked 6, 7, and 8 respectively, while items 3, breaking down of cost of customer service, placed in rank 9 with a weighted mean of 2.86. Lastly, item 10, lowest total cost selection, ranked in bottom with a weighted mean of 2.76. The computed average weighted mean of 3.25, which is interpreted as somewhat implemented, clearly shows that supply chain management practices in terms of cost reduction mechanisms are only implemented in some degree. Listed here as supply chain management practices in this category are best practices in the industry. Lee et al. In 2006 explained that these practices are a proven set of activities undertaken by most organizations to promote effective management of its supply chain. The objective of cost management in supply chain is to bring products with world-class quality and leading technology to the ultimate customer on time, every time, and at the lowest market price. According to Uncle Sarya in 2008, strategic options should be available as this could tell us how a cost driver could be reduced, changed, or eliminated in order to impact a given cost element. This means that cost reduction mechanisms or strategic options should be available effectively to manage the unnecessary cost in supply chain. Table 13 presents the results of a respondent's assessment on the extent of implementation of supply chain management practices in terms of supply chain systems integration. As observed, all practices with their corresponding weighted means and ranks are all interpreted as somewhat implemented. The weighted means, however, dictate the rank, which starts from the highest with a weighted mean of 3.46, which is item 2, technology integration and network design, and items 5, 4, 6, and 1 are placed in ranks 2, 3, 4, and 5 with a weighted means of 3.33, 3.27, 2.92, and 2.86 respectively, while items 3, level and quality of cost data, information sharing transparency, rank 6 with a weighted mean of 2.63. Overall, the computed average weighted mean is 3.08 and interpreted as somewhat implemented. This clearly implies that supply chain management practices in terms of supply chain systems integration were more or less implemented, and there is an indication that this could have a direct or indirect impact on cost in the supply chain in the marine equipment of offshore vessels of Swire Pacific Offshore. As shown in Table 14, the extent of implementation of downstream supply chain management practices in terms of measurement and continuous improvement, the result reveals that Item 5, Internal Audit and Inventory, rank 1 with a weighted mean of 3.38. In rank 2 is Item 2, Evidence of Success such as cost reductions, quality, and timing, with a weighted mean of 3.29. While in ranks 3, 4, and 5 are items 3, 1, and 4 with weighted means of 3.25, 3.24, and 3.19 respectively. Lastly, at rank 6 is item 6, continuing professional development, such as education and training, with a weighted mean of 3. The result further shows, based on the computed average weighted mean, which is 3.26, and is interpreted as somewhat implemented, that all supply chain management practices in terms of measurement and continuous improvement are only implemented in some degree. This implies that in the procurement process of marine equipment in offshore vessels of Swire Pacific Offshore, this particular supply chain management practices were more or less implemented that may directly or indirectly contribute to additional cost in the supply chain. Let's proceed to answer the problem number 4, which is there a significant difference on the assessment of respondents on the extent of implementation of downstream supply chain management practices on life cycle costs of marine equipment when grouped according to profile? To answer this problem, tables to be shown in the next slides are the results of Kruskal-Wallis H-test on the difference of the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of downstream supply chain management practices on life cycle costs of marine equipment when grouped according to profile, such as type of business entity, group of marine equipment key player, and number of years of operation. Also, the figures will show the results of post hoc tests using Dunn's procedure with a Benferroni correction for multiple comparisons that were conducted as a follow-up to confirm where the differences occurred between groups. As shown in Table 15, a Kruskal-Wallis H-test was conducted to determine if there were differences in respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of downstream supply chain management practices on life cycle costs of marine equipment when grouped according to type of business entity. It can be seen that the distribution of respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of supplier-customer partnership and leadership in a chi-square value with degree of freedom of 4, which is 14.623, with a p-value or asymptotic significance of 0.006, cost reduction mechanisms with a chi-square value of 9.895, p-value of 0.042, and measurement and continuous improvement with a chi-square value of 18.601 with p-value or asymptotic significance of 0.001, ECM practices were statistically significantly different when grouped according to type of business entity. A pairwise comparison was performed using Dunn's procedure with Benferroni correction for multiple comparison to check if which type of business entities differs among the 3 ECM practices, and the results are shown in Figure 4, 5, and Figure 6. On the other hand, the distribution of respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of a strategic planning and design process with a chi-square value of 7.488 with a p-value or asymptotic significance of 0.112 and supply chain systems integration with chi-square value of 6.322, p-value of 0.176, ECM practices were not statistically different when grouped according to type of business entity. Regardless of its type, According to Fletcher et al., strategic planning and design process is vital to all companies in planning how to rationalize, make buy decisions, and making decisions in allocating resources to pursue its strategy as well as planning to specific activities in the supply chain. Generally, it involves setting goals, determining actions to achieve the goals, and mobilizing resources to execute the actions. The strategic planning and design process, supply chain management practices, may include mutual planning and problem solving efforts, process benchmarking, mutual willingness to share responsibilities, supplier customer long term agreement to manage costs, and change adaptation and management. Supply chain systems integration, such as those in business processes, integration, and technology at intra or intercompany level, according to Fletcher et al., is necessary to be implemented as this serve as the environment in which different supply chain mechanisms are used. Supply chain systems integration supply chain management practices may include integrated product data systems, technology integration and network designs, level and quality of cost data information sharing, logistics integration, value chain analysis, and just-in-time or lean capability. Shown in Figure 4, this post-hoc analysis revealed statistically significant differences in the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of supplier-customer partnership and leadership supply chain management practices between public limited company with an average rank of 16.65 and private limited company with an average rank of 40.96 in a p-value or adjusted significance of 0.016, as well as the public limited company with an average rank of 16.65 and limited liability company in an average rank of 48.20 in a p-value or adjusted significance of 0.016. This means that respondents in the private limited company and limited liability company have higher extent of implementation of supplier-customer partnership and leadership than public company or limited company with 16.65 average rank. The findings on the significant differences on the extent of implementation of supplier-customer partnership and leadership supply chain management practices among private limited company, limited liability company, and public limited company are supported by the study of DNVGL Maritime and Fraunhofer CML 2015. It suggests that because marine equipment suppliers and customers are mostly situated in different geographic locations, in such manner, there seems to be a cultural difference in regions where bargaining each transaction is perceived as the purchases or ship owner or shipbuilder value to the company, which is the supplier. As business entities, they are formed and administered as per corporate laws in order to engage in business activities. The legal systems and specific rules vary by country, state, or province, and Fletcher et al. Reinforce this as part of the organizational system that are not easily changeable or are harder to change in some reasonable manner, and this will influence supplier-customer partnership and leadership. Chen et al. In 2004 also believed that corporate culture is one of the most critical aspects of integration between two businesses, supplier and customer. According to Tan et al. In 2006 and Fawcett, Magnan, and McCarter in 2008, supplier-customer collaboration are also greatly influenced by management commitment, as both companies have to view the partnership as a shared growth strategy and be fully committed to the trust each other to act their mutual best interests. As shown in Figure 5, this post-hoc analysis revealed statistically significant differences in the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of cost reduction mechanisms, supply chain management practices between public limited company with an average rank of 26.10 and limited liability company with an average rank of 55.50 in a p-value or adjusted significance of 0.033. This means that respondents in the limited liability company have higher extent of implementation of cost reduction mechanisms than public limited company with only 26.10 average rank. The findings on significant differences observed between limited liability company and public limited company on the extent of implementation of cost reduction mechanisms can be attributed as strategies that an organization will perform to reduce or eliminate redundant costs in the supply chain processes and activities. Cost reduction mechanisms, or ECM practices, are organizations' strategies to reduce costs in the supply chain, and this may include strategic outsourcing and consolidated purchasing, cost management strategy process mapping, breaking down of costs of customer service, well thought out requests for quotation and RFQ responses, organizing costs based on cost elements, analyzing costs and modeling, such as cost or should cost, total cost of ownership, target costing, purchasing balance scorecards, identifying critical costs in the supply chain, and lowest total cost selection. The extent of implementation of these practices, according to Wagner in 2008, are greatly influenced by its incidence of usage, as some firms are using or implementing these practices not in regular basis and often indicate that the standard supply chain operations reference models does not fulfill their company-specific requirements. Thereby, many larger organizations have developed their own supply chain reference models depending on the level and quality of information shared with other partners in the supply chain. As shown in Figure 6, the post-hoc analysis revealed statistically significant differences in the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of measurement and continuous improvement supply chain management practices between privately held company with an average rank of 21.05 and private limited company with an average rank of 46.92 in a p-value or adjusted significance of 0.007, as well as public corporation or company with an average rank of 26.64 and private limited company with an average rank of 46.92 in a p-value or adjusted significance of 0.011. This means that respondents in the private limited company have higher extent of implementation of measurement and continuous improvement than privately held company and public corporation or company. These findings on the significant differences on the extent of implementation of measurement and continuous improvement supply chain management practices observed among privately held company, public corporation or company, and private limited company are viewed as organizations' enhancement efforts to stay in a competition within the supply chains where organizations are gaining competitive advantage and promoting organizational performance. Measurement and continuous improvement supply chain management practices are those processes and activities of organization to continually monitor, evaluate, taking corrective actions and improve the suitability and adequacy and effectiveness of supply chain management system. These practices may include supply chain metrics, evidence of success such as cost reductions, quality and timing, mutual supply chain processes, continuous improvement, organizational supply chain management, continuous improvement, internal audit and inventory, and continuing professional development. This was supported by the study of Fletcher et al., Uncle Saria in 2008. As part of organizations' enhancement efforts to be viable in global race, Uncle Saria insisted that internally improving and leveraging the process are more than necessary to be implemented by expanding the strategies and leveraging the ideas of cost management to be integrated in the supply chain. As shown in Table 16, a Kroskal-Wallace H-test was conducted to determine if there were differences in the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of downstream supply chain management practices on life cycle costs of marine equipment when grouped according to marine equipment key player. It can be seen that the distribution of respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of supplier-customer partnership and leadership with a chi-square value in a degree of freedom of 2, which is 6.229, in a symptotic significance or p-value of 0.044, a strategic planning and design process with a chi-square value of 9.687, and a p-value of 0.008, and measurement and continuous improvement with a chi-square value of 11.058 with asymptotic significance or p-value of 0.004, ECM practices were statistically significantly different when grouped according to marine equipment key player. A pairwise comparison was performed using Dunn's procedure with a Benferroni correction for multiple comparisons to check if which of marine equipment key players differ from the three practices, and the results are shown in Figure 7, Figure 8, and Figure 9. On the other hand, the distribution of respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of cost reduction mechanisms with a chi-square value of 0.256 with a p-value or asymptotic significance of 0.880 and supply chain systems integration with a chi-square value of 3.918 with a p-value of 0.141, ECM practices were not statistically different when grouped according to marine equipment key player. Without a statistical difference in the implementation of cost reduction mechanisms ECM practices, Lee et al. In 2004 explained that at organizational level of having an ultimate challenge and goal of getting a product and service to the right place at the right time at the lowest cost, implementing ECM practices that integrates cost reduction mechanisms are effective competitive weapon to achieve long-term performance in the supply chain, such as among marine equipment key players. Regardless of organizations' characteristics, Uncle Saria in 2008 strongly asserted that implementing cost reduction strategies is imperative to long-term survival and for organizations to be globally competitive to sustain revenue growth. In the context of supply chain, according to Wagner in 2008, cost management practices such as total cost of ownership, supply chain costing, value chain analysis, balanced scorecards, supplier lifetime value, activity-based costing, and supply chain operations reference are just among of the adapted strategies from other disciplines and have been developed within the field of supply chain management. With these different strategies emerging to manage the cost in the supply chain, Uncle Saria asserted that it is essential that companies should first embark on a journey of managing costs before they notice that they already suffer a major loss of profits or market share to avoid the unsustainable cost-cutting measures. As shown in Figure 7, this post hoc analysis revealed no statistically significant differences in the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of supplier-customer partnership and leadership supply chain management practices between supplier, shipbuilder, and ship owner. This means that respondents' assessment do not have significant differences when grouped according to marine equipment key player. The result of no statistically significant differences on the extent of implementation of supplier-customer partnership and leadership (ECM) practices between all groups of marine equipment key players is a display of unified collaboration between ship owner, supplier, and shipbuilder in the supply chain. In the context of ECM in marine and shipping industry, supplier and customer collaboration is a special partnership dedicated in the downstream supply chain with the goal of establishing a long-term relationship with mutual benefit in the life cycle of marine equipment and in delivering value-added services. It is a counter-relationship as those between the equipment supplier, also known as original equipment manufacturer, and its supplier, which according to Fawcett et al. In 2008, collaboration between them in the supply and value chain is the ability of work across organizational boundaries to build and manage unique value-added process to better meet customer needs. Strong management commitment, trust, collaborative communication, information sharing, and collaborative planning are just few of the collaborative efforts to better achieve supplier-customer partnership and effective leadership. Chen et al. In 2011 added that availability and quality of information shared between partners are also critical to the supplier-customer collaboration. Hence, according to Liu and Wang in 2011, cooperation between them is imperative to achieve mutual goals. As shown in Figure 8, this post-hoc analysis revealed statistically significant differences in the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of strategic planning and design process (ECM) practices between supplier and ship owner, with an adjusted significant value of 0.017. This means that respondents that are ship owners have higher extent of implementation of strategic planning and design process than suppliers with an only 25.74 average rank. The results of the statistically significant differences on the extent of implementation of strategic planning and design process (ECM) practices between ship owner and marine equipment suppliers can be regarded as due to industry requirements and investment-wise at ship owners' accountability. The higher extent of implementation of strategic planning and design process initiated by ship owner is a display of strong corporate social responsibility and adaptation of technical and environmental requirements dictated by industry regulations with considerations to the value of investment. Ship owner, being the ultimate customer, is the source of demand, which according to Fawcett et al. In 2008, the suppliers have to meet customers' needs and requirements. To ensure that an organization's strategic goals will be achieved, all activities should be aligned to its strategic plan, which is according to Porter in 1980, it is important to chart the long-term direction of an enterprise through strategic planning. To serve this good purpose, ship owner has to carefully outline the requirements prior to the procurement of marine equipment, and Porter in 1980 reiterated that an organization has to set its expected outcomes through strategic planning by identifying inputs, initiating the activities, and by periodically updating the outputs. Supplier and ship owner are always dependent to its symbiotic relationships. Requirements outlined by the ship owner that comes as technical specifications are the necessary inputs for the supplier into the design stages of the product development. That's according to Khan in 2012. To produce and meet the specific needs of the ship owner with the quality and value of money that has invested. Unsurprisingly, ship owner has demonstrated a higher extent of implementation of strategic planning and design process (ECM) practices because they are the source of the requirements and the ultimate end user of the marine equipment, which they also have a social responsibility to follow industry regulations for environmental protection and safety of life at sea. As shown in Figure 9, this post-hoc analysis revealed statistically significant differences in respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of measurement and continuous improvement (ECM) practices between shipbuilder and ship owner with p-value or adjusted significance of 0.013, as well as the supplier and the ship owner with a p-value of 0.006. This means that respondents that are shipbuilders with average rank of 46.92 have higher extent of implementation of measurement and continuous improvement than shipbuilders with 27.20 average rank and suppliers with only 28.51 average rank. The result of statistically significant differences on the extent of implementation of measurement and continuous improvement (ECM) practices between shipbuilder and ship owner, as well as supplier and ship owner, and the display of higher extent of implementation of ship owner clearly imply that both the shipbuilder and supplier have to put more effort on improving their internal and external processes related to supply chain management. ISO in 2015 stated that processes to determine a value or measurement and the recurring activity to enhance performance continual improvement are essential delivering quality products and services. ISO added that successful organizations have an ongoing focus on improvement as it is essential to maintain current levels of performance, to react to changes in its internal and external conditions, and to create new opportunities. The supplier being the initial customer or the purchaser of marine equipment during the construction period of the vessel are also expected to align the procurement process with the specific requirements of the ship owner to swiftly identify critical costs in the supply chain. According to Uncle Saria, to the suppliers and the customers alike shall develop a strategy of managing costs through the supply chain, and this includes the process of identifying critical costs in the supply chain as a commitment for mutual process continual improvement. Fletcher et al. Confirmed that customers demand and realize continuous improvement in cost, quality, and delivery to suppliers. Demand for supplier continuous improvement appears to be a significant trend, especially in cost reductions. Another key element is continuing professional development through education and training, which is according to Fletcher et al. Can help companies to augment capabilities to become a world-class performing professionals. As shown in Table 17, a Proskal-Wallis age test was conducted to determine if there were significant differences in the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of downstream supply chain management practices and life cycle costs of marine equipment when grouped according to number of years of operation. It can be seen that the distribution of the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of a strategic planning and design process with a chi-square value in a degree of freedom of 3, which is 11.692, in a p-value or asymptotic significance of 0.009, ECM practices was statistically significantly different when grouped according to number of years of operation. A pairwise comparison was performed using Dunn's procedure with a Benferroni correction for multiple comparisons to check if respondents' assessment and strategic planning and design process differs in the number of years of operation, and the result is shown in Figure 10. On the other hand, the distribution respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of supplier-customer partnership and leadership with a chi-square value of 4.153 with a p-value or asymptotic significance of 0.245, cost reduction mechanisms with a chi-square value of 1.096 and a p-value of 0.778, supply chain systems integration with a chi-square value of 1.847 with a p-value of 0.606, and measurement and continuous improvement with a chi-square value of 5.918 with a p-value or the asymptotic significance of 0.116. ECM practices were not statistically different when grouped according to the number of years of operation. These findings of no statistical difference on the extent of implementation of supplier-customer partnership and leadership, cost reduction mechanisms, supply chain systems integration, and measurement and continuous improvement (ECM) practices can be logically attributed to several factors among organizations operating in different number of years, and apparently experience and capability on both technical and technological do really matter on their existence and success. Despite the findings of no statistical difference, it is still worth to revisit the study of Fletcher et al. And have a comparison on how these key players change or improve their management practices through the supply chains since then. As far as the shipbuilding and shipping industries are concerned, their study have concluded that lack of consensus among key players on the structure, function, and the dynamic of integration of supply chain management have hampered the implementation of ECM practices in shipbuilding. They also concluded that shipbuilding was challenged by lags in the use of electronic commerce technology. Furthermore, they noted that marine equipment suppliers' relations are more adversarial in some regions which impede better communications. According to Wikipedia, roughly 30 years ago, the specialization era of ECM as a service has begun in the 1980s with the inception of transportation brokerage, warehouse management, and non-asset-based careers, and has matured into a transportation and logistics into aspects of supply planning, collaboration, execution, and performance management. Supply chain specialization enables companies to improve their overall competencies in the same way that outsourced manufacturing and distribution has done, and it allows them to focus on their core competencies and assemble networks of specific best-in-class partners to contribute to the overall value chain itself, thereby increasing overall performance and efficiency. Given the constraints and remarkable challenges of the past, more than 30 years since then, Wikipedia further explains that now in this new era, the term Supply Chain Management 2.0 or ECM 2.0 has been coined to describe both changes within supply chains themselves as well as the evolution of processes, methods, and tools to manage them. ECM 2.0 replicates the notion of usable pathway from Web 2.0 to supply chain operations. Web 2.0 is a trend in the use of the World Wide Web is meant to increase creativity, information sharing, and collaboration among users. At its core, the common attribute of Web 2.0 is to help navigate the vast information available on the web in order to find what is being bought. In this new age of technologically advanced and globally connected marine and shipping industry, According to DNVGL Maritime and Fraunhofer CML in 2015, the role of information and communication technology in the implementation of procurement and supply chain management practices has demonstrated its increasing significance. Although shipping industry has not yet found a standard for electronic data interchange or EDI that exchanges messages electronically from the procurement system of the ship manager to the sales system of the marine equipment supplier, DNVGL Maritime and Fraunhofer CML added that with the use of popular e-commerce marketplace, this could however take over the role of managing the electronic communication with suppliers. Consequently, this practice could allow a transparent supply chain and increase collaboration between ship owners, ship builders, and marine equipment suppliers. As shown in Figure 10, this post-hoc analysis revealed statistically significant differences in the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of strategic planning and design process (ECM) practices between 10 years and below, with an average rank of 8.90, and 30 years and above with an average rank of 34.09, in a p-value or adjusted significance of 0.022, as well as 10 years and below and 16 years to 20 years with a significant value, adjusted significant value of 0.013. This means that the respondents that are operating 30 years and above with a 34.09 average rank and 16 to 20 years with average rank of 37.83 have higher extent of implementation of strategic planning and design process than respondents that are operating 10 years and below. These findings of statistically significant differences on the extent of implementation of strategic planning and design process (ECM) practices amongst companies operating in 10 years and below, 16 to 20 years, and 30 years and above, according to McCormack and Lockamy III in 2004. This demonstrates that ECM planning and capability of an organization which is dictated by ECM process maturity. This process has a life cycle that is assessed by the extent to which the process is explicitly defined, managed, and measured and controlled. It also implies growth in the process capability, richness, and consistency across the entire organization. Hammer in 1996 asserted that as an organization increases its process maturity, institutionalization takes place via policies, standards, and organizational structures. According to McCormack and Lockamy III, as processes mature, they move from an internally focused perspective to an externally focused systems perspective that is determined by organization's process capability. McCormack and Lockamy III added that going through a process continuous improvement, a level of maturity can be achieved which are associated with process maturity characteristics such as predictability, capability, control, effectiveness, and efficiency. Thus, higher extent of implementation of strategic planning and design process (ECM) practices by companies operating in more than 30 years is a proven capability that organization has reached a certain level of maturity in a process. The famous quote, "Experience is the best teacher," is apparently true and proven, where companies who have been in the business or operating for a long time already have acquired more capability to strategically plan, solve problems efficiently, effectively do economic forecasts, and manage the anticipated changes in the supply chains. Lastly is problem number 5, which is what proposed improvement of downstream supply chain management practices and life cycle costs of marine equipment can be employed based on the data gathered. To keep the vessel ready to sail, the procurement of the supplies, services, and major marine equipment is just one of the rigorous tasks of ship managers and of fleet supply chain managers to the account of ship owner as the ultimate end user. However, successful implementation of procurement system does not only involve the end user. This also involves the active collaboration of the shipbuilder and suppliers during the construction phase of the vessel and between the supplier and the owner in the operational life of the vessel in the supply chain. To answer problem number 5, based on the data gathered, as a researcher, I firmly propose to improve downstream supply chain management practices on life cycle costs of marine equipment, which will be shown shortly. Collectively, these proposed improved downstream supply chain management practices are labeled as integrated ship life cycle and strategic supply chain cost management practices. This is a proposed procurement and supply chain management actions and processes to be integrated in the organization's existing ship management system and is based on ISO's high-level structure in a context of plan, do, check, and act cycle as described in Figure 11. As shown in Figure 11, the procurement and supply chain management requirements are categorized in a iterative 4-step management method, the Deming's Plan, Do, Check, Act, or PDCA cycle according to TAG 2005. First, the plan. In every procurement and supply chain management system to work effectively, the company shall meet the requirements in organization and leadership, planning and support, cost reduction mechanisms, and supply chain systems integration. It is in this phase where the organization should establish the procurement and supply chain objectives and processes necessary to deliver inputs in accordance with the expected output, such as the target or goals. By establishing output expectations, the completeness and accuracy of a specification is also part of the targeted improvement. The second process, which is do, in this phase, the company shall implement the procurement and supply chain plan or execute the process and collect data for charting and analysis in the following check and act steps. In this step, the company shall meet the requirements in operation, fleet, supply chain management by initiating specific process. The third process, which is check, in this step, the company shall meet the requirements in performance evaluation by studying the actual results or the measured and collected in do and above process and compared against the expected results such as target or goals from the plan to ascertain any differences. Look for deviation in implementation from the plan and also look for the appropriateness and completeness of the plan to enable the execution, for example in the do process. Charting data can make this much easier to see trends overall several PDCA cycle and in order to convert the collected data into information. Information is needed for the next step, which is the act. In the fourth or last step, which is act, in this step, the company shall meet the requirements in improvement, the process and actions, and if the check shows that the plan that was implemented in do is an improvement to the prior standard or the baseline, then that becomes the new standard for how the organization should act. Going forward, the new standards are enacted. If the check shows that the plan that was implemented in do is not an improvement, then the existing standard, the baseline, will remain in place. In either case, if the check shows or showed something different than expected, whether better or worse, then there is some more learning to be done, and that will suggest potential future PDCA cycles. Note that some who teach PDCA cycle that the act involves making adjustment or corrective actions, but generally it would be counter to PDCA thinking to propose and decide upon alternative changes without using the proper plan phase, or to make them the new standard baseline without going through do and check steps. To be integrated to the company's management systems, these proposed improved ECM practices strive to: first, ensure quality of marine equipment and related services in the supply chain; second, manage the critical costs in the supply chain; third, ensure availability of marine equipment on time; and give additional momentum to the continuous and systematic improvement of processes and actions within and among partner organizations. The integrated ship life cycle and strategic supply chain cost management practices are proposed as enumerated in Table 18. As shown in Table 18, the high-level structure, procurement, and supply chain management, or PSCM, is in the context of PDCA cycle, or the plan, do, check, and act cycle. In the plan step, the management practices includes the organization and leadership, planning, support, cost reduction mechanisms, and supply chain systems integration. In the organization and leadership, under the plan phase, this includes the organizational level of expectations in the procurement and supply chain. This also includes leadership and commitment in the procurement and supply chain cost management, determining the scope of procurement and supply chain management, organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities in the procurement and supply chain, establishment of procurement and supply chain policy. It also involves staff management involvement in the supply chain cost management during the life cycle of the ship, intra-company supply chain cost management dynamic teams, supplier-customer relationship management, and result-oriented customer service and asset reliability management. In planning step, this includes the practices to establish an intra-company procurement and supply chain management strategic planning team, agreed vision and goals for supply chain cost management, consideration of long product life cycle and warranty period, process benchmarking to address risk and opportunities, change adaptation and management, defining the key cost drivers and developing strategic options, supplier-customer planning and problem-solving efforts, supplier-customer long-term agreement to manage costs, mutual willingness to share responsibilities, value chain analysis, and cost management strategy process mapping. In the support, cost reduction mechanisms, and supply chain systems integration practices, this includes technology integration and supply chain network design, integrated product data systems availability and flow of product data, supply chain transparent and quality information sharing, determine and provide resources for the implementation of continuous improvement, have the necessary competence such as training, education, and experience, the high-level awareness, communication, and proper documentation, identifying critical costs in the supply chain, and logistics integration. Now, in the do cycle or the do step, this includes operation of fleet or the fleet supply chain management. This includes the well thought out request for quotation and RFQ responses, implementing action plan, ethical and sustainable procurement, reducing, changing, or eliminating activities that cause cost, customer and supplier geographical proximity, strategic outsourcing and consolidated purchasing, suppliers' reliability for cost, quality, and on-time delivery, target costing, breaking down of cost of customer service, organizing and estimating costs based on each cost elements, cost modeling and analysis, purchasing balance scorecards, and just-in-time or lean capability to integrate with planning and scheduling. For the check step, this involves the performance evaluation practices, which includes cost reductions, quality and time as evidence of success, measuring secondary and tertiary costs, verifying the plan with cost monitors, internal audit and inventory, management review and assessment, and intra-company procurement and supply chain management performance evaluation. Lastly, in the act step, there is the improvement process and actions management practices. This includes the continuing professional development such as education, training seminar, workshops, symposia, consultations, forum, and conferences. This also includes procurement and supply chain processes improvement such as Six Sigma, and non-conformity and corrective actions are necessary. Repeat the cycle until objective is reached. That completes the results and discussion. Now, please do allow me to present the summary of findings, the conclusion made, and the recommendations offered in this study. Summary of findings. In the profile of company respondents in terms of type of business entity, the result shows that public corporation or company has the highest representation with 25 respondents or 39.70% that were coming from 3 company respondents. In terms of group of marine equipment key player, the supplier group dominates with the representation of 35 respondents or 55.56% that were coming from 7 company respondents. While in terms of number of years of operation, it was revealed that 6 company respondents with 38 respondents or 60% are operating their businesses in more than 30 years already. In the respondents' assessment on the level of importance of downstream supply chain management practices and life cycle costs of marine equipment of offshore vessels of Swire Pacific Offshore, the computed average weighted means in terms of supplier-customer partnership and leadership is 4.28 and is interpreted as very important. The strategic planning and design process is 3.88 and interpreted as important. Cost reduction mechanisms is 4.09 and interpreted as important. Supply chain systems integration is 4.07 and interpreted as important. And measurement and continuous improvement is 4.36 and interpreted as very important. In the respondents' assessment on the level of implementation of downstream supply chain management practices and life cycle costs of marine equipment of offshore vessels, the computed average weighted means in terms of supplier-customer partnership and leadership is 3.45 and interpreted as implemented. A strategic planning and design process is 2.84 and interpreted as somewhat implemented. Cost reduction mechanisms is 3.25 and interpreted as somewhat implemented. Supply chain systems integration is 3.08 and interpreted as somewhat implemented. And measurement and continuous improvement is 3.23 and interpreted as somewhat implemented. In the test of significance using Kroskal-Wallis age test and post-hoc analysis using Dunn's procedure with a Benferroni correction for multiple comparisons, it was noted that the distribution of respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of supplier-customer partnership and leadership, the chi-square value is 14.623 with asymptotic significance or p-value of 0.006. Cost reduction mechanisms with a chi-square value of 9.895 with a p-value or asymptotic significance of 0.042 and measurement and continuous improvement with a chi-square value of 18.601 with a p-value of 0.001, ECM practices were statistically significant different when grouped according to type of business entity. The post-hoc analysis revealed statistically significant differences in the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of supplier-customer partnership and leadership (ECM) practices between public limited company with an average rank of 16.65 and private limited company with an average rank of 40.96 with a p-value or adjusted significance of 0.016, as well as the public limited company with an average rank of 16.65 and limited liability company with an average rank of 48.20 and the adjustment significance or the p-value of 0.016. This post-hoc analysis also revealed statistically significant differences in the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of cost reduction mechanisms (ECM) practices between public limited company with an average rank of 26.10 and limited liability company with an average rank of 55.50 or with an adjusted significance of 0.033. This post-hoc analysis revealed statistically significant differences in respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of measurement and continuous ECM practices between privately held company with an average rank of 21.05 and private limited company with an average rank of 46.92 and the adjusted value or the piece value is 0.007 as well as public corporation with an average rank of 26.64 and private limited company with an average rank of 46.92 with an adjusted significance or the p-value of 0.011. In the test of significance using Kruskal-Wallis H-test and post-hoc analysis using Dunn's procedure with a Benferroni correction for multiple comparisons, it was noted that the distribution of respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of supplier-customer partnership and leadership with a chi-square value of 6.229 and the asymptotic significance or p-value of 0.044 is strategic planning and design process with a chi-square value of 9.687 and a p-value of 0.008 in the measurement of continuous improvement with a chi-square value of 11.058 with a p-value of 0.004, ECM practices were statistically significantly different when grouped according to marine equipment key player. The post-hoc analysis revealed no statistically significant differences in the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of supplier-customer partnership and leadership practices between supplier, shipbuilder, and ship owner. The post-hoc analysis also revealed statistically significant differences in the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of strategic planning and design process (ECM) practices between supplier with an average rank of 25.74 and ship owner average rank of 42.15 with an adjusted significance or p-value of 0.017. The post-hoc analysis further revealed statistically significant differences in the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of measurement and continuous improvement (ECM) practices between shipbuilder with an average rank of 27.20 and ship owner with an average rank of 46.92 with an adjustment or adjusted significance or p-value of 0.013 as well as supplier 28.51 and ship owner with 46.92 average rank with a p-value or adjusted significance of 0.006. In the test of significance using Kruskal-Wallis H-test and post-hoc analysis using Dunn's procedure with a Bonferroni correction for multiple comparisons. It was noted that the distribution of respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of the strategic planning and design process with a chi-square value of 11.692 and an asymptotic significance or p-value of 0.009. ECM practices was statistically significantly different when grouped according to number of years of operation. The post-hoc analysis revealed statistically significant differences in the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of strategic planning and design process ECM practices between 10 years and below with 8.90 average rank and 30 and above with average rank of 34.09 and adjusted significance of 0.022 as well as 10 years and below with an average rank of 8.90 and 16 to 20 years with an average rank of 37.83 with a p-value or adjusted significance of 0.013. For the conclusion of this study, in the light of the findings of the study, it clearly suggests that most company respondents as marine equipment key players, even though they are operating in more than 30 years already, their perception and the importance of downstream supply chain management practices are slightly inconsistent and contrary to its actual implementation with the marine equipment supply chain industry. Company respondents recognize that downstream supply chain management practices are vital to the supply chain cost management in the life cycle of marine equipment. However, they are only implementing it in some degree, and that may somehow have a direct or indirect impact of the life cycle cost of marine equipment accountable to the ultimate end user, which is the ship owner. Therefore, it is clear that as far as the supply chain costs are concerned, improvement to its management and solid implementation of ECM practices are deemed necessary. Through the test of significance using the Kruskal-Wallis age test and post-hoc analysis using Dunn's procedure with a Bonferroni correction for multiple comparisons, as a researcher, I came up with the following conclusions. First, there were statistically significant differences on the assessment of the respondents on the extent of implementation of supplier-customer partnership and leadership, cost reduction mechanisms, and measurement and continuous improvement downstream ECM practices when grouped according to type of business entity. The post-hoc analysis further revealed statistically significant differences in the respondents' assessment on the implementation of supplier-customer partnership and leadership, the ECM practices between public limited company and private limited company, as well as the public limited company and limited liability company. The post-hoc analysis also revealed statistically significant differences in the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of cost reduction mechanisms ECM practices between public limited company and limited liability company. The post-hoc analysis furthermore revealed statistically significant differences in the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of measurement and continuous improvement ECM practices between privately held company and private limited company, as well as public corporation or company and private limited company. Second, there were statistically significant differences on the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of supplier-customer partnership and leadership, strategic planning and design process, and measurement and improvement ECM practices when grouped according to marine equipment key player. The post-hoc analysis, however, confirmed that significant differences only occurred between supplier and ship owner and the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of strategic planning and design process ECM practices. The post-hoc analysis further confirmed that significant differences occurred between shipbuilder and ship owner, as well as supplier and ship owner in the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of measurement and continuous improvement ECM practices. Third conclusion, There was a statistically significant difference on the respondents' assessment on the extent of implementation of strategic planning and design process (ECM) practices when grouped according to number of years of operation. The post hoc analysis confirmed that significant differences occurred between companies operating in 10 years and below and 30 years and above, as well as between companies operating in 10 years and below and 16 years to 20 years. For the recommendation of this study, in the downstream of supply chain, marine equipment suppliers as the main source of information should be transparent, and the flow of information should not be impeded by the interest of profit and at the expense of the middle consumer, the shipbuilder, and ultimately the end user, which is the ship owner. Information means everything. It can be pricing, costing, planning, material quality, product reliability, and everything that adds value to the product itself. While ECM practices are vital to the competitive advantage and organizational performance, it must be regarded as a tool to reduce cost or eliminate activities that add more cost in the supply chain. Hence, the tripartite relationship among ship owner, shipbuilder, and marine equipment suppliers should be nurtured with fervent leadership and commitment to manage cost in the supply chain. It is therefore highly recommended to ship owner, shipbuilder, and suppliers to collaborate and implement the proposed improved downstream supply chain management practices stated above to ensure quality of marine equipment and related services in the supply chain, to manage the critical cost in the supply chain, to ensure availability of marine equipment on time, and to give additional momentum to the continuous and systematic improvement of process and actions within and among partner organizations in the supply chain. It is also high time to consider that there should be an internationally recognized supply chain management system standard as organizational requirements to be met and guidelines to be followed. Organizations around the world actively participating in the global trade of products shall implement a supply chain management standard common for everybody to effectively manage supply chain quality, cost, and time in the production, distribution, consumption, and disposal of these products. For future research, it is recommended to do more relevant studies in the downstream supply chain management of marine equipment, especially in areas of organization and leadership, planning, support, operations, performance evaluation, and improvement. That's the end of my presentation. I hope I was able to comprehensively discuss most of the content of my research. I'll anticipate and appreciate your advices, so please give me your constructive comments. Thank you very much. God bless us all.